right. So we've been doing a series on violence, and the past 2 weeks, we have been talking about sexual violence, and especially as it relates to women, and what things that we can do to be able to see sometimes those warning signs in our children that they may have been, touched inappropriately by someone, that someone has, committed some sort of sexual act against them, but also how to minister so that we can have healthier individuals. We want empowered women, but we also want allied men and boys, empowered women and empowered girls, but also allied boys and men. And we want boys and men, and well, we want everybody, male and female, to be able to act appropriately when it comes to dating, when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to sexuality, to behave appropriately at all times, to respect women as gifts from God. All right. That men are not over and above women, but that God made humanity both male and female. And I think sometimes what gets lost is sometimes how the church can contribute, or how the church does contribute to these negative views toward women sometimes. And that if that's the problem, then we need to change what we teach. We need to change how we teach so that we can change the narrative regarding women, not just in the church, but in society, period, and make sure that we are building up healthy women, strong women, empowered women who know and have that confidence that they can do all things through Christ who strengthens them, just like any man can. Are there different roles? Yes. But that does not mean, for instance, I'm the pastor of this church. That is not necessarily a role of authority as much as it is a role of responsibility. And so it's not so much about me looking down on anyone, or putting an iron fist down over anybody. It's about the fact that my role in this church is different from everybody else's roles. Okay. And so uh, 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 um, Dwayne Johnson would say, know your darn role. Okay. But when we look at this in terms of authority and so forth, then we're probably missing what it is that God is really trying to help us see, and the direction that the Holy Spirit really wants us to go in. And so this lording over women, okay, or this believing that women are property, how is that any different than the slavery that our people had to overcome? All right. So we need to try to look at these relationships not in terms of power, but in terms of roles and responsibilities. Now, some things we haven't talked about as far as Dinah is concerned. One of the things we haven't talked about is the honor, okay? That this act of Shechem, okay, robbed Dinah of her honor, okay? And furthermore, not only is she dishonored, did Shechem dishonor her, but it's the perception that comes with that, because now she is no longer bride material for anyone. All right. And so because of Shechem's act, societally, she would now be looked at as a prostitute, even though this was not her decision. And we read this, that he took her and laid with her by force. All right. So other things we look at, all right, that we're still trying to figure out here in 2021, unfortunately, is the idea that men had a say over women's sexuality. Okay. And so one of the things that this brings up is abortion rights. Okay. Um, and there are fundamentalist thinkers who say, never abortion, even if a pregnancy should never ever be aborted, even in cases of rape or incest, or if the mother is having particularly hard time and could potentially be in a life-threatening situation if she were to move through this. Now, there are those on the other end of this, though, some of the more I hate to use those terms because we use them too haphazardly, but those who have a more liberal view would believe that, they would believe in pro-choice, that a woman has a right to decide what to do with her body, even with regard to abortion. And then somewhere in the middle, there are those of us who say, well, wait a minute, and I would consider myself to be in the middle. I don't know. I cannot get with aborting a fetus. Okay. And I don't think that that's something that we should be encouraging among our women. Okay. But at the same time, I also have a problem with old white men telling women what they can and can't do with their bodies. Okay. And so that's the challenge right there. And so we know that Roe versus Wade has gone under quite a bit of scrutiny over the last 50 years. Roe versus Wade is late 60s, early 70s that led to pro-choice and led to women having the right to abort their fetuses with certain regulations. As a church, though, we should be encouraging men and women to be responsible. Uh, like I said last week, we know what the Bible says about fornication. We know what, and the young people, they know what the Bible says about fornication also. So that is something we can't argue. Okay, Scripture says what it says. However, because we know that young people operate a little bit differently, their thinking is different. Okay, and like I said last week, we older people, we don't have to like it. Okay, it's not about whether you like it. You got to make decisions when you were younger, and you didn't always take your parents into consideration or anything like that. So these young people, they have that opportunity and that privilege and that right now in their young adulthood to do whatever it is that they choose. Now, I always go back to Ecclesiastes, the 11th chapter, and I'll read it for you real quickly here. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. All right, here we go. Maybe this is why I like electronic books a little bit better, especially the Bible. Bibles always have the thinnest pages, and it's so hard to. So, Ecclesiastes, the 11th chapter, verse 9, it says, rejoice, young man, while you are young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Follow the inclination of your heart and the desire of your eyes, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Okay, let me read that again. Rejoice, young man, while you are young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Follow the inclination of your heart and the desire of your eyes, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Okay. And so we let young people, we do the best we can. Okay. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to give an account before God. All right. And they're the ones that will have to incur those natural and logical consequences that come with whatever their behavior happens to be, good or bad. All right. So get back to the text here, though. We're in the 34th chapter of Genesis. And where we are in this text, Shechem has now fallen in love with Dinah. And so he talks to his father, the king, he talks to Hamor, and he wants Hamor to make arrangements with Jacob so that he can marry Jacob's daughter, Dinah, whom he forced to have sex with. All right. Now, at some point, people become aware of what Shechem has done to Dinah. And at some point, Jacob is aware of this. However, because Jacob's sons were away from him, despite his anger, he could not react and he could not take vengeance against Shechem because he didn't have any help. All right, he didn't have any backup. And so if you're gonna go against a prince and potentially against the king as well, better have some backup. All right. Now the sons return, and at some point the sons now realize what has happened to their sister. Okay. So we're going to start at the 25th verse. Now, first I need to tell you about the deception. So the deception is what Hamor wants to do, or what Shechem wants to do. Shechem wants to marry Dinah. All right, he raped her, but now he's got these feelings for her, and so he wants to marry her. Okay, twisted. Okay, very twisted. And so, unfortunately, we have a lot of people in this world who are selfish, self-centered. And it doesn't matter how everybody else feels. It only matters whether it brings them pleasure. Okay. And that is a problem in any context and in any type of relationship. However, when we're talking about men and women, and we're talking about men exerting themselves against women, or even adults exerting themselves against children, okay? Now, we have to look at this in an even different light, because now we're talking not just immorality, but we're talking about something that is most likely illegal. Okay? Remember that we're talking about something, if I were to date this text, we're talking about something, and we're talking about a lifestyle that is probably 3,000 years removed from us. Okay, possibly even more than that. Okay, we'll say between 3,000 and 3,500 years ago would probably be about the time that this text would have, that the things that we're reading about in this text would have happened. Okay, and so thinking was different then. But my problem is, here we are 3,500 years later, we're still fighting for women's rights, still fighting for women's liberation, and still fighting for women to be able to define themselves for themselves without having men define them. Okay? That every individual should have the opportunity and the right and the privilege to be able to identify themselves. All right? And so women should be able to be a part of the leadership in the church, especially since women make up the majority of many of our churches. And so being in those leadership positions, women get to help decide the direction of the church. They get to participate in the leadership of the church. They get to participate in the various roles of ministry in the church, and not just the supportive roles. All right. But it starts with getting over things like Dinah, things like Tamar. Okay. A number of issues that we see in scripture where women were taken advantage of, and usually sexually. All right. So Hamor uh, wants to make a deal with Jacob so that they can intermarry. Okay. And not only intermarry, but uh, they want to start basically a community of their own. All right. And so Hamor and Jacob come up with this. Well, here's where the deception comes. Jacob and Jacob's sons say, listen, we agree to mingle with you all. We agree to intermarry. We agree to share land together. We agree to trade with one another. But first, you have to become circumcised. All the men have to become circumcised, because we can't be among a people that does not, where men are uncircumcised. And so Hamor and Shechem and his son Shechem and all the men of this area, of Canaan, they agree. All right. So now each and every one of them goes through this process of circumcision. And that's where we pick up here in the 25th verse of chapter 34. On the third day, when they were sitting, when they were still in pain, this is after the circumcision. So on the third day, 2 days after they had been circumcised, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city unawares and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth. Hold on just a sec, please. All right. All of their, all of their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and made their prey. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, should our sister be treated like a whore? All right. So let's talk a little bit about retribution. In this particular case, Simeon and Levi rather, okay, they take justice into their own hands to avenge the rape of their sister. And what they in turn do is they slay Hamor and his son Shechem and all of the warriors. And then they pillage the land. They take the cattle, they take all of the wealth, they even take on the wives. And so now here's a situation that I want to bring up because, all right, they take, and this was one of those things that was a standard part of war. Okay, this was pretty standard in war, that when you defeat your enemy, that you take their possessions for yourself. And those possessions include slaves, it includes wives. Okay, so they're upset that their sister has been defiled, but then in turn they go and take the wives of these men whom they've slain and defile them. There's always something wrong with an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, especially now that we are under grace. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the best we can to improve public safety. Everybody has to be safe walking around. Everybody has to be safe going outside of it, especially in their homes. But even when they're outside of their homes, we must do whatever we can to promote and improve public safety, and definitely against any forms of sexual violence. Now, so is incarceration the answer for people who commit these offenses? Is a life sentence the answer for people who commit these types of offenses? Unfortunately, we have a lot of Shechems in this world. What should we do about Shechem? Now, we see what Simeon and Levi did. They killed him, they murdered him. But what should the response of the church be? So I want to say it was summer of 2017, or no, I'm sorry, late spring of 2017, had an opportunity to be able to go to the University of University of Cincinnati rather, and do a week-long training there on rehabilitation. And for the most part, this is about reentry, and how we approach people who are coming from a prison system back to community life, and how we help them with that transition from prison back to the city, how we help their families with that transition. This person's been gone for a long time. Families have moved on and have created a lifestyle without that individual. Now that individual is back. What do we do to help make this a more seamless transition? Okay. And while I was there, one of the things that was said, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he is responsible for a lot of the more progressive rehabilitation programs throughout the country. All right. And one of the biggest things University of Cincinnati is known for is their criminal justice program. All right. World-renowned criminal justice program. Now, one of the things he said, though, is that rehabilitation is the best practice for improving public safety. One of the things that we as a society have to start to wrap our heads around is that punishment does not seem to be working. All right. And I know that I'm probably going to have some people listening today who struggle with what I just said. Punishment does not seem to be working. Okay. However, there have been, and there's more and more research coming in all the time, that rehabilitation is the better alternative to improving public safety than punishment is. Okay. You can lock them up, but if you don't heal them while they're locked up, then most likely the only thing that you've done is created what would now be a better criminal coming out than he or she was going in. Now, here's where the problem is, though, when we're talking about people who have committed various acts of sexual violence. Even though we know, the research tells us that rehabilitation is a better alternative to public safety, one of the hardest illnesses to treat are sexual offenders. Okay. People who do sexually motivated offenses, and especially your SVPs, your sexually violent predators, these people are extremely difficult to treat. And part of it is because even though we can't understand it, this is a basic urge for them. This is just like our food, just like our being hungry, or even our sexual urge. Okay. their sexual urge is different because they're wired differently. And there are a lot of theories why they're wired the way that they are, and a lot of theories that about serotonin, serotonin, having too much serotonin in their brains during their fetal development and so forth. Lots of different theories. Okay, and so even though we know rehabilitation is the better answer, we are still learning how to be more effective in rehabilitating sex offenders. Okay. So now that I've said some probably controversial things to some of you, I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of a discussion about what we've been talking about here today. All right. And so let me just start out with this first question. I'm just going to ask you, with regard to sexual violence, what do you think that we as a society can do better to decrease the number of rapes and other types of sexual violence issues? That's the first question, but then I want to make it even more specific. What do you think the church should do to address this crisis? All right. So number one, what can we do better as a society to make our women, specifically our women and children, safe? But I'm hoping too that we all understand that men, women, and children, everybody is susceptible to sexual violence, unfortunately. Okay. Women are at a much more increased risk than men are, but it doesn't mean that sexual violence does not happen to men as well. So as a society, what can we do to make things better? And then as a church, what do we need to do in order to make things a little bit better? So if you would just please remember to unmute yourselves. I would like to hear some of your responses. Yes, ma'am, Sister Bridford.
I was thinking that you still have to take them off the streets. That protects society. And as far as the rehab, um, I don't know. Don't prison systems have some type of rehab?
Honestly, so I haven't been in prisons as much as I've been in jails.
Okay.
And there are programs. I guess I have a twofold issue though. A lot of the programs that are in prison should have been made available to these people before prison. For instance, people can go to prison and get a college degree free of charge. All right, but the reality of it is, how many of them are really going to be able to use that college degree once they come out with this felony on their records?
Right.
If we had put education and things like that on the front side, though, especially with our young people. So right now we're working on a program for young youth diversion. Okay, very much needed, because when I started working with young people, one of the first things that I realized is, man, by the time I got them, it was too late. All right. So that's the first thing. I will agree that that removing them temporarily may be beneficial to public safety. However, at some point, it's not doing us any good to keep these people housed for very long sentences. Um, And there are other ways that we need to be addressing this. So the rehabilitation sometimes that's available in prisons, well, I mean, it's like a crapshoot because it's all going to depend on who the warden is, who the social workers are in that particular prison. And so every prison is not going to have the same programs. Every prison is not going to have the same rules as to who is eligible for these programs and who isn't. And so there's lot of variables in there, but let's remove them and let's, work to rehabilitate them. And then let's talk about steps to bring them back into society. Okay.
Okay.
Would be, would be my, my answer. Prison is just, it's not working. It is not working. And we're throwing money on, we're throwing money on the wrong end. Okay. So I don't know if you all saw that there is I want to say Champaign, Illinois has now made reparations available for the African Americans in that city. All right.
Mhm.
We need money on the front end of this thing. That's why when we're talking, when we're talking about um, from womb to tomb, okay, see, a lot of these quote unquote pro-life champions are really not pro-life, because if you're pro-life, then it's not just about ensuring that this individual, that this fetus comes full term and is born. It's much bigger than that. Okay. If we don't increase healthcare, if we don't increase education, if we don't empower economically these families and these households, uh, and there are other issues that we need to address, but on a different level. Okay, that's a lot of times what creates not just sexually violent predators, but it just creates criminality. Period. And so when we don't do enough on the front end, then we try to throw all this money, and what we're really doing is we're being hypocritical, because we're not throwing money so that these lives can be rehabilitated. We're throwing money just so that people can get rich off of somebody else's criminality. Whether we're talking prison systems, whether we're talking nonprofit organizations and things like that. Okay. I mean, we got privatized prisons that will charge the state for every empty bed. And so when we're charging for empty beds, a surcharge for an empty bed, all right, then what message is that sending? That's sending that we want more people in prison.
Mhm.
And when we spend more money in prisons than we do in schools, all right, every time somebody talks about building a new school, all hell breaks loose. Like, people just become unglued. Every time a school district asks for a levy increase, oh my God, you know, nobody says anything about pumping all of this money into Geo Corporation and some of these other privatized prison systems. Okay. Then when we look at just how much it costs to house somebody, so I was on a call with Franklin County last week. $27,000 a year,
Mhm.
but we don't want to give them $15 an hour for minimum wage. So I'd rather pay you $27,000 a year to keep you out of society than to give you a living wage in society, where you can now contribute to the economy through the taxes that are taken away from your salary. All right. So no easy answers. So now, Sister Bridget, what should the church do?
Well, I was thinking about that too. I'm glad that I go to Grace because you tend to address a lot of subjects that other churches don't. Um, so I think that's the answer. Churches need to address these type of subjects and put it in a more realistic tone. Um, because like you said, just telling people that the Bible says don't doesn't stop anything. So you have to put it in a more realistic tone to reach everybody.
Okay. So we got to change our tone, and we have to be, I guess what I'm hearing is that we need to talk about some things that we don't talk about enough,
Right. Make it relevant to the
and we
day,
have
to
and we have to
today.
make it okay, and we have to make it relevant. Okay. Somebody else, society, what should we do? And church, what should we do?
My turn.
Okay. Yes,
Uh,
sir.
I know I'm gonna get myself in trouble, but we have programs for drug abuse. When they're on drugs, we give them drugs. Smoking, they somebody has a problem with smoking, we give them, help them wean themselves off of smoking. Why can't and I know, like I said, I'm getting myself in trouble. They just can't have something where these sex offenders, just put them in a room or somewhere and just let them go at it wherever they want to go at it, do it for as long as they want to go at it, and, you know, be done with it there.
Well, because again, this is it, it's an urge that is very, very difficult. First of all, we don't understand it the same way that we do drug abuse, I think. Okay. Um, Again, there are a lot of theories, but even with what little we even with what little we know about addiction, um, alcohol and drug addiction, we still know a whole lot more about alcohol and drug addiction than we do about sexual urges, because remember that sexual urges is still basic. Okay. um and unfortunately, I think part of where some of this stuff starts is we make young men, I don't think that we talk to young men and young women enough in their pubescent years. We don't talk enough about just the natural urge, that it's okay to feel like that's natural, that lets you know. Okay. And so there's a lot of sexual repression, a lot of sexual suppression, and these children have things that are going on in their bodies, and nobody is talking to them in a realistic manner about what's going on with their bodies. And so it sometimes those things even lend themselves to maybe not rape, but sometimes it can lead to certain inappropriate acting out, sexual acting out. Okay. But my point is we don't understand this enough. And even with the therapies that we try to implement, yeah, there is some, there are a lot of sex offenders that don't reoffend. Okay. But unfortunately, there are a lot of sex offenders that do reoffend, and that's what we don't want. Okay. So we've learned how to help people manage addiction in large ways to eventually become clean. However, if an alcoholic or somebody who is addicted to some, drug or whatever, if they relapse, it may not be as life-threatening as a sex offender who relapses. Okay. Remember that again, this is no, they're wired differently. And so what pleases, and sometimes it's not, I should say this too. Sometimes their sexual offenses don't have anything to do with necessarily a sexual urge, but sometimes it is a power issue. Okay. So it's not about sexual gratification, it's about power. That's what makes this thing so complicated. Just like when we're talking about serial killers, we don't understand it, but a serial killer can commit murder And that act of committing murder can be sexually gratifying to them. When you're dealing with this, when you're dealing with the mind, oh, I mean, this is one of the most amazing things that God has ever made. When it's functioning the way that it should, but when it's not functioning the way that it should, because of environment, because of, whatever, okay, it can also be one of the most dangerous things on the planet. And we don't always know how to make it work right. Okay. Um, Again, locking people up, there is some necessity in that, but throwing everybody in a room somewhere, it's not. So the thing I would ask is, how would that help?
Well, like I said, they sooner or later they'll get tired of it or get
No,
get
no,
worse.
no, they won't, because remember how urges and impulses work. Just because that urge or impulse is satisfied now doesn't mean that that urge or impulse is not coming back. I mean, it's just like you eat until you get full, but you didn't eat enough to keep you from never ever getting hungry again. Okay. We as human beings, sex, first of all, sex is necessary. We become extinct if we don't reproduce. Okay. Now, just because you engage in a sex act and you receive gratification from that, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have another sexual urge. And now when we're talking about younger people, we're talking about sexual urges that happen that happen, several times throughout the day. Okay. So yeah, it wanes as you get older, but it doesn't mean that it stops. So it wouldn't necessarily I don't know that I don't know how effective that would be, especially when what we're really trying to do is we're trying to, first of all, prevent it where we can. Okay. I want to say this too. Sex offenders, there are sex offenders out there who were once victims of a sexual offense. But that does not mean that every person out here who is a sex offender has been sexually abused before. Okay, this is not a cycle, and we don't have any evidence to suggest that just because there are lots of victims out here of sexual violence and sexual abuse who will never ever sexually offend anyone else. You won't see that behavior in them. So just because someone's a victim of sexual abuse does not turn them into a predator. Okay, so I do want to make that clear. I do want to make that clear as well. All right, sexual victims of sexual abuse do not automatically become offenders. Most of them will never ever commit a sexual offense. Now, it may manifest itself in other ways, problems in relationships and different things like that, but it does not necessarily becoming a predator. Okay. So we are at the end of our time, but I do feel like this is something that we need to talk about a little bit more, because we need clear guidance in our churches. So questions that I could, really make you feel uncomfortable. We talked about it Sunday while I was preaching about being a little bit uncomfortable because someone from one of the shelters comes in and wants to worship with us. But now I have this question for you, and this is what we will leave on, and then we can pick this up next week. I want to ask you, all right, when it comes to someone, a predator. Now, do we have certain rules and things like that are in place? Sex offenders are not supposed to be in certain spaces unsupervised where there are children or anything like that. And let me say this too: most sex offenders have a type. Okay, there is. And I don't want to even talk about it because some of them are just, hard to even imagine that you would be sexually attracted to some of the things that these people are sexually attracted to, but that's where they are. Okay. Now, how do we get them? Can we get them to some sort of normal and appropriate sexual behavior? Well, that's what we need to try to figure out. But we can't do that if they can't become a part of a community where that's possible. Okay. So how comfortable would you be with a supervised sex offender being in your congregation? All right. Hear me here. I'm going to ask this question one more time before we go. We're not talking about unsupervised. Okay. But how would you feel? Because usually sex offenders, they come, if they do get out of prison, they have to register with the county every 90 days, I believe, to verify their address and so forth. Some of them are on some sort of community control, such as GPS monitoring. Okay. So you got the one kind of monitor. There's a big old black box, and you bring it home and you sit it there. And as long as you are in, within the area of your house, then, you're cool. That's usually like house arrest though. But then there are the GPS ones. Those can track where you are at any time. Okay. And those are a little bit different. Okay. Those things will alarm if you tamper with it, if you try to take it off or anything like that. But they're so good, they're so specific that not only can they tell where you are at live, okay, but it can even tell them from downtown where you are in that particular structure. If you're on the second floor, first floor, basement, okay. Regardless, if we had a supervised sex offender who wanted to become a part of our Christian community, how would you feel about it? All right. So one more thing I want to announce before we go, but we want to congratulate Renee Lefton, and we want to celebrate with her because she is now officially retired. And so we thank God for her being a part of our Christian community. Thank God for her presence and for her support and everything that she does for us. And we just salute you. We say, hey, congratulations. Okay. And you are in a growing number because pretty much everybody in this group today is now retired except me. All right. And I know that, as long as I stay alive, I'm going to at least 70. All right. But I can't make any promises beyond that. However, what I also can say is that I still enjoy getting up and going to work every day. And I still enjoy I still have a passion for doing what it is that I do. So I would not retire right now if I could. If I want a whole bunch of money, that just means I would be doing what I do for free. But I can't stop doing it. All right. So congratulations, Renee. Thank God for you. And thank God for all of you. Hope to see you all this coming Sunday at 12 noon. And for those of you that might not see this coming Sunday, hey, happy Easter to you. And we hope that you have a great resurrection day. All right. God bless.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
God bless you too.